G'day Internet. Today I wanted to go through the Ruby on Rails resources that I use every day, or almost every day, as I'm coding. I'll start with the Ruby on Rails API. So this is at api.rubyonrails.org. It is very comprehensive, and it's probably the first thing I reach for if I'm stuck on a particular syntax issue or want some guidance on how to use a particular feature. It's broken up into all the different Rails modules, and if I just want to look up how something works, I do a search for it. So if I'm wanting to know the time ago in words syntax, I can just start typing in time ago and it'll filter it out, and I can then select it and see what the syntax is for the time ago in words helper. But this is a really good reference guide for the specifics of various features of Rails. It's really cool. You can also just click on the actual module and drill down into the various areas to go through and find things. I sometimes find myself just reading through this without having a particular thing to do. Just, you can really go through, and especially in active support, if you go through active support, the amount of magical helpers that you will find here that you didn't know existed, or just to remind you that they do exist, is a really good way. So sometimes you can just scroll through these and get a really good example of things that you could use in your projects. So the API documentation is really helpful. Next thing I refer to almost on a daily basis is the Ruby on Rails guides. That's at guides.rubyonrails.org. The guides for previously released versions of Rails are on that URL, so you'll see the current version is 7 at the time of recording, and you have the guides for the previous versions. If there's features added or you're using the main branch of Ruby on Rails, then you would use Edge guides. So these are the guides for unreleased version of Rails that's currently being developed. I'll normally just use the one that's for the version of Rails that's in the project that I'm working on. There's a index here. The main stuff that I use it for would be the active record sections. It's really well documented. And you can, for example, go to the associations area. You've got the chapters on the side here, and it goes through detail. For example, if I click on the has many, it gives you nice diagrams on what it refers to, how to use it. So just a really fantastic resource. One that I point a lot of people to when they ask me questions on things, and it's a really good explainer. So I highly recommend this, and both of these are actually, both the API documentation and the Rails guides are in the Rails repository, which is another thing that I've got here that I refer to often. So if I go into Action View, and then I drill down into the number helper, this one here, you can see that the API documentation is done through here. So the number to currency documentation as its output here is actually in the source code here. And some of my early contributions to Rails, and what you could look at if you're wanting to contribute back to Rails, is reading this documentation and refining it, making it clearer for people. And that's the same with the Rails guides. So I highly recommend if you end up solving a problem, or you're stuck on a problem that you end up solving that the documentation wasn't able to help you with, contribute back to Rails and this documentation, because it's going to help either future you or a new developer, or even me, on how to use the feature a lot easier. The last resource that I use on a very regular basis, and this is if you've got a lot of projects that you maintain, is Rails Diff. Rails Diff is handy for when you're upgrading from one version of Rails to another. So what you would do there is, let's say that you're upgrading a Rails application from version 6, and let's say that you're on the latest point release, which is 6.044, and you're wanting to upgrade it to version 7. Well, you wouldn't do that. I wouldn't recommend that. Go to 6.1. So 6.044 to 6.11, if you diff, and it'll show you the differences if you were to start a new application in both of those. So what I do with this is I would just go file by file and update those files from one version to the next. It doesn't take very long. Maybe each upgrade in terms of updating these files would probably take 30 minutes to 45 minutes. A lot of it is very simple stuff, like where single apostrophes change to double and all that sort of stuff. But the key ones that are often changed that you need to look at is the config environment files, config environment development, config environments production, and so that's Rails Diff, very good resource. So they're the three key ones. If I get rid of edge guides and go back to Rails, these would be the four key things that I refer to almost daily. Definitely these three, especially the API documentation and the source code. Now, one tip with the source code in terms of keeping up to date with changes in Rails, particularly active support, which is one of my favorite libraries in Rails, is if you just click into the module and click on the change log. In the change log, you'll have here all the things that are changing, all the things that are being updated, that are documentation worthy, and it is a goldmine of information to keep updated with how things are changing, usage examples that you may not get in looking at the API documentation. So yeah, keep an eye on the change logs for each of the various libraries, especially the ones that you're really interested in. Active Model is another good one to keep an eye on. So I check in with the changelog stuff probably every week. I would hop in and just have a look and see what's happening. It just keeps me up to date, and also it gets exciting too, because if you have a feature that's going to make your life easier as a developer, or you really look forward to these some of these things getting either backported to a previous version or added to the next version, especially if they're fixes that are really bugging you. So that's my tip with looking at the change logs. I hope that was helpful. There's a bunch of other resources that I use that I'll cover off in another episode, newsletters and things like that are pushed out to me that I don't actively go looking for. But in my day-to-day development, what I use is these three sites.